Welcome to the audio version of Conjured BTS, a BTS fanfiction by Zmelio. Episode 4, A Day in the Life of Amy. It was still dark outside. She'd only fallen asleep 4.5 hours ago. There were plenty of times when Jin remembered getting less sleep, but he didn't expect Amy to have that kind of a schedule. He tried to cover his ears tighter and waited for her to move, but she didn't move. She didn't so much as stir. She was oblivious to it. He looked at the pillows on the floor, wondering if they would block the noise. He noticed the stuffed RJ that had fallen from her bed to the floor. RJ, buddy, help me. But alas, RJ was just one stuffed alpaca. Jin turned his attention to the girl. Amy! 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 Amy's eyes opened to an angry Jin, and she softly, groggily said, "What?" before her eyes closed again. Jin growled, and she opened her eyes again, a look of confusion on her face. Why is Jin here, and why is he angry? Jin? Her eyes closed again, then opened to an angrier Jin yelling, "Amy!" She startled awake and called his name. "Jin! What? What's wrong?" He yelled the answer, "Your alarm!" Then repeatedly hit his ears to try and make the sound go away, and when she still didn't get the message, he yelled again, "Shut it off!" She woke up enough to start understanding and said, Okay, turning it off. He could see her heavy eyelids closing again. "Oh, no, you don't." He lifted her from the bed and stood her on her feet. She still drifted, and he let go for a moment so she could feel the sensation of falling. She let out a small squeak and woke up enough to gain balance. She squinted at Jin. Slowly she came to awareness. It's somewhat of a stupor. She started her morning routine. She took a fresh set of clothes and went to the bathroom, closing the door behind her. When it got too quiet, Jin pounded on the door until he could hear movement again. Eventually she opened the door. "Good morning, Jin," she said with a sleepy smile and half-crossed eyes. "Good morning, Amy," Jin responded flatly. "Nice of you to join the world of the living." She nodded, only partially noticing his sarcasm. She took out her ponytail and brushed her hair. She straightened her school uniform as best she could. Looking at herself in the mirror with Jin by her side, she sighed, I look terrible." As annoyed as Jin was, he couldn't let that slide. He folded his arms and shook his head. No. You don't say that to yourself. You look at yourself in the mirror and you say," he pointed violently at the mirror, "that is a pretty girl in the mirror. How did she get so pretty?" Amy's head was drooping. "Oh, that would be a little more convincing if you weren't angry with me." She looked like she might start crying. Jin sighed and set himself straight a bit. He reminded himself that she was young and sad and lonely. He pulled himself together. "I'm sorry. If I would have known you had school today and you had to get up early, I wouldn't have let us stay up so late playing video games." Then he let the rage take over for a second, exclaiming, "Your alarm is very annoying." Then sighed again to compose himself. He smiled and returned to his old sweet self. "Amy, you can look in the mirror and tell yourself that you are pretty. Not just because it's good for you, but because it's the truth." Amy brightened. "You really think so, Oppa?" He folded his arms again, but more friendly now. "What do you think?" She was a bit shy, saying, "I guess I could be a little pretty." He gave a thumbs up and she smiled. He decided to get on the bus with her to school. He had nothing else better to do. She sat alone, so he sat next to her, and he could tell she wanted to talk to him but decided against it. It would look strange to be talking to an invisible friend, so they looked out the window and watched the scenery pass by. Throughout the day he was a silent observer. She would look over at him with a small smile, and a few times during lectures she would start to speak, but he put his finger to his lips and then pointed to the teacher. She would frown and obey. At the end of the day, the halls were crowded with people, so crowded Amy took the chance to talk out loud. Can we walk home instead of taking the bus, so we could talk? It's not far. Are you sure you want to? Jin wondered. You seem tired. You fell asleep in math class. We're not staying up so late tonight. Amy protested, but I always fall asleep in math class. It's boring. Jin countered, do you always stay up late? She looked away. He put his finger to his forehead. Well, that's a problem. She argued, I don't like math anyway. She exchanged books in her locker and turned around to a piercing but empathetic look from Jin. Do you always eat alone at lunch too? She grumbled, I don't like lunch either. Jin searched for a positive note. What about choir? I like choir, she responded brightly. Jin nodded. Did you try out for the solo? She shook her head no. No, I'm not that good. Jin put his hands on his hips. I'll be the judge of that. When we get home, we are going to start straightening this out, young lady. He gestured sternly. You are going to start treating yourself like someone who's worth taking care of. Yes, soaked Jin Oppa. They decided to take the bus home. She tried to lean against Jin, but they found when anyone happened to look in their directions, he would lose substance. She would start falling through him, and they both found that disturbing. Amy leaned against the window instead and fell asleep. Jin watched her sleeping and wondered what he could do to help her. All day she shuffled through the halls with her head down, a combination of unconfidence and lack of sleep. Some people might be surprised to know how well Jin understood her situation. His confidence came from loving himself and, like he told Army before, it took practice to get where he was. He had one day left with her, just one, and there were a few things he could help her with tonight to make tomorrow a better day. But what about the next day and the one after that? He needed to work on leaving something or someone behind for her when he was gone. He looked over the rows of children on the bus. He got up and started listening to their conversations. When they got to Amy's house, she ran down to the basement. Jin was confused. Was he supposed to follow her? She would call him if he was supposed to follow. She had typed in a code to open the door, and the house was so quiet. She must have been alone for a while, until her parents came home. Amy ran back up the stairs. Look, Jin, she beamed. They're my dad's first-person shooter games. Let's see how often I can kill you, she giggled as she ran up to her room. Jin tilted his head and narrowed his eyes. They really should tackle math, but... He sighed. It could wait. Jin, Amy called. He smiled, marched up the stairs, and psyched himself up for the show. Ah! Jin yelled as he fell back on the floor, acting dead as his avatar in the game. Amy, dinner! Amy's mom's voice was heard from downstairs, and Jin snapped back to sitting upright. Dinner already? How long have they been playing? He looked at the clock and cursed himself for losing track of time. Amy told Jin she would be back and popped out the door. He leaned back against the bed frame and sighed with a smile. He forgave himself a bit for getting lost in the moment. They were always pushing themselves for something. At that moment it was the release of butter. Jin was careful not to divulge any spoilers. Amy returned with a plate full of what looked like small burritos. She plopped the plate down between them and picked up the controller again. I don't think you need to eat, but you can, so I brought up extra. So your parents are home? Did you talk to them? Jin asked. Amy nodded. Yeah, they're home, but I said I was busy working on homework, so they let me come up with food. Jin frowned at her. He took the controller out of her hands and put it down. Then we should eat quickly and start on your homework. You don't want to lie. Amy's face made a bit of a pout, and Jin had to admit he was swayed by it. Tell you what, after we eat, you sing for me. I can tell whether or not you should try out for that solo. Amy had to admit that was a good compromise, so she agreed, but she wasn't prepared for how nervous she was to sing in front of the one and only Jin. It's okay, he reassured her. Just close your eyes, take a deep breath, and just pick a song you like.